It's hard to get people to put money into something if they don't know who you are, if you're unproven. I think with any film, there's always stress on it. But that was tough, and that created some tension. If all you do on your film is get good audio, you basically won the war. I think if your budget is under $100,000, you should just not even bother getting a distributor. The biggest lesson I learned was you don't know what you don't know, which is everything. No one else is coming to do that for you. You have to learn it.
Today I'm speaking with John Isberg, the versatile writer, director, and producer of the new slasher film Final Summer. John and I will be discussing how he made a slasher film outside of Hollywood, including finding financing, how he overcame budget constraints, and finally releasing the film today. John, it's no secret that Hollywood is in turmoil right now. We got so many strikes going on. Nobody's happy with anything. Needless to say, for me, it was really refreshing to kind of see a film like this. I really love slasher films, horror films, and stuff like that. I've gushed with you a little bit behind the scenes about this movie, but I want to primarily focus on this interview with the production process and kind of the behind the scenes, if you will. So that's really what I want to dive into with this movie. So I got to start with the hard-hitting questions. How much did this movie cost to make?
In blood or in money? No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, really in both.
Well, there's a sweat equity thing, but that, who knows? I think sweat equity is more like what you are willing to do to make your film as good as it possibly can be under the circumstances. So I think there's no real accounting for that. But no, we had a $16,000 Kickstarter. I had 4 kind of friend and family investors who kind of each threw in $5K. So that was an additional 20. And then I would say the rest came out of my pocket. When I started in film in 2014, as I kind of grew, I would continually, as every paycheck or every thing that I got from a commercial shoot, I would reinvest in gear. And so I think by the time we went into this film, I had pretty much a full production studio worth of gear. So I had camera, Dana Dolly, all the grip and electric, all of the sound and lighting. And then there were friends of mine who had other more lighting and more C-stance and stuff. And so we kind of cobbled our production, studio grip truck from all of that. So I would say it's definitely under $100,000, I would say.
Let's talk a little bit about the script itself. I mean, that's obviously one of the most important pieces of a movie. I mean, there's obviously no movie without a script. So how long did it take you to write the script? How did you kind of initialize this concept, and about how long did it take you, or how long did you sit on this story before you actually got into production?
So in 2019 was really the start of the film, and I was doing the workshop at the time, and I was trying to find the right idea. You realize that your ideas are much more ambitious, i.e. expensive, than you think. And so originally we were going to do kind of a creature feature, kind of a movie about a car that breaks down in the forest in the winter, and there's something in the mist with them or something, But then I saw there was a movie called Monster, which was exactly my idea. So then I looked at other resources we had, and I just started looking at Boy Scout camps nearby. Because I'm like, well, I do like slasher films, and was cognizant of the fact that, I like Friday the 13th a lot, and we haven't had a good Friday the 13th in a long time. It's been locked up in litigation forever. And so I was like, well, I think I'd like to do a summer camp slasher, because in my naivete, I thought that was also a one location film, when you realize that your one location has hundreds of acres and 80 different locations in it, kind of a thing. But basically from the story perspective, I would say once I kind of started to think about camps, it was the winter of 2019. I went to the summer camp called Camp Drake, and I started walking around with my son, and we were walking in the winter, and I was getting ideas, because I like to go to places to get ideas. And so I saw, I like that bridge in the forest. That's really cool. They got a pool there. That could be something. And we kind of snuck into where the kitchen was, and I was, this kitchen is amazing. I could see a killer chasing someone through there. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. And then I started to just start getting to the story, and because I never wrote a script before, I never wrote a feature film before, I was starting to get into, there's this thing called story circle or story clock, and I started to just study tons of slasher films. Like Halloween, I would take a piece of paper, draw a circle on it, and start to really understand the flow of a film, from the first act into the second act, the midpoint, the low point of the end of the second act into your third act, kind of turnaround, and then all of that stuff. It was interesting too to think about with the story circle that whatever happens on this side of the film should be addressed again on this side of the film. So it's kind of interesting to go back to a director I really like a lot, Jordan Peele, where he talks about he has these amazing setups and payoffs. So he'll set something up over here, and it'll pay it off on the opposite side of the movie. And I think for me, having ADHD, where I could go all over the place, it was nice to have something where you had a structure to it. I would just watch a lot of YouTube videos, and a lot of masterclass became like my friend. As your film goes through all these different stages of like from prep to the writing, like from writing, like idea into the writing, your film changes so much. And then you make choices in your story sometimes that I think your audience, I'm realizing, don't always get. And then they'll perceive it as, oh, this movie's bad. It's literally like the choice that you made in the film, but I think they might think of it as like, well, this is incompetent or whatever. But it's kind of fascinating to go through this whole process and to see how people get or miss your idea, and it's really fascinating.
Going back to the financing a little bit, you did a Kickstarter, which I'm kind of surprised at. I don't see a lot. I'm sure there is a lot of Kickstarters, but it's just not as popular as it was maybe, say, back when Kickstarter was really a thing and like everybody was trying to finance their indie films. You brought investors, you talked about raising money from your family. Can you just talk to me a little bit about your experience with coming up with those finances, like your experience with the Kickstarter and talking to investors, et cetera?
There's a really great South by Southwest keynote speech by Mark Duplass where he talks about that the cavalry isn't coming, and the cavalry isn't coming. To go to the Kickstarter, it really, I think as a first-time filmmaker, your biggest probably sources of money are going to be the people that you know. No matter how viral you think it might go, it's literally comes down to people that know you, who are willing to take a chance on you. So that was kind of it. There were two people that really were responsible for the majority of our Kickstarter. So there was a lot of like smaller donations, and then there were like two kind of big friends of mine who kind of saved the day at the end there. And so I'm really grateful to them because we wouldn't be here at all. I had some other people who kind of, I think, as they started to see it take steam and take shape and everything, they were kind of gracious and kicked in like, $5,000, per person. And so that was really helpful. That was huge help too. But those were also people who I'd had, kind of personal relationships with or professional relationships where they were people I had done video for, or I had a history with, or they'd seen, I'd shot commercials for them. And so, for the indie filmmaker out there who's thinking about, because I'll see this a lot, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot too on like a lot of these indie filmmaker Facebook groups and stuff like that. It's like, the number one, the $50,000 question everybody always has is, where can I find someone to see the brilliance of my dream and then give me a lot of money? I'm like, dude, that will never happen. So you have to get used to the reality of that you are the one who's going to make this happen. The Kickstarter was its own thing for sure. I kind of went with that because I felt like the all or nothing model, because I tried Indiegogo before. We didn't make what my ask was. And I felt like, well, the Kickstarter at least will give me, like, we got to do this. We got to do this thing. And thankfully, we did meet our Kickstarter thing, but it was tough. It's hard to get people to put money into something if they don't know who you are, if you're unproven. I think I was lucky in which I had already done a lot of commercial work locally. When you're starting out, I think it's good to think about that 5-year kind of plan kind of thing. And so I started in 2014 as a grip. By 2019, I had a music video that I shot that ended up in like the New York Times or whatever. And then I got to work with like my musical heroes, the Pumpkins. That was always good for me to like think about like, where I started and then where I am right now. And so even if I'm not like maybe making money, it's like I'm seeing that at least there's growth there, at least that it's leading one opportunity to the other. And so I think that's the thing for other indie filmmakers out there is to not be discouraged by this lack of money, because I feel like you're never going to have enough.
Even Hollywood doesn't have enough money most of these films, so it's no surprise that it's even less here. Yeah,
so I really feel, and that's your point, because you were also like, you were trying to make your film in Indiana, and we were trying to make our film in Champaign, where it's like, we might as well be nowhere. And so I think that's where I felt like to look at these other films that were made outside of Hollywood. So I looked at Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Night of the Living Dead, and to a smaller extent, Evil Dead, as case studies for how to do our film. So Tobe Hooper, when he shot Texas Chainsaw, he was in Austin. They shot about a half hour out of town. He looked at BFA in acting program graduates from UT Austin to put it in his film. He looked at local crew from Texas. I think to a greater extent, I really resonated with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Like I went to Horror Hound and I listened to the panel with a lot of the people who worked on Night of the Living Dead, like Judith Odia and some other people. And it was really wild to see how like George Romero had the camera, and I forget the guy, but like the guy who plays the villain in the film, like the dad or whatever, he had the sound. And so it was this really interesting marriage of like picture and sound. And that's how they kind of took those resources that they did have, and then made this groundbreaking film that horrified everybody at the time. When you're not in those cities like LA and New York and Atlanta, you have to be more creative about things. If that person is not there, you have to become that person. So I had to learn all these things about how to make a DCP, The color space thing of like grading was like the crackhead phase of the film. All these things that you have to do yourself. So YouTube is your friend, The biggest lesson I learned was like, you don't know what you don't know, which is everything. No one else is coming to do that for you. You have to learn it.
The marketability of your film can come down to who you got in the film. It's been no secret that you've been able to secure talent like Tom Matthews, Bishop Stevens. How did all this come about from, the name talent down to, just like the production assistants?
So that was kind of the reason I wanted to do the teaser trailer that we shot a year before we did the actual film. Because there's so many slasher films out there, I wanted them to see that I didn't want this to be like your typical kind of lousy looking, like whatever, just very lo-fi film. I mean, I feel like at this point, I can't say anything bad about anybody's film because any completed film is a miracle. But I wanted to show kind of the concept of the film, to show the atmosphere of the film, and that it was going to be much more atmospheric and moody, and as a way to kind of get them to see my vision for it, versus seeing a slasher film on paper could be any one of 1,000 things, and originally I reached out and I got Neil Affleck, who was in My Bloody Valentine, who played Axel in My Bloody Valentine, to be in the film. He's in Toronto, and so then with COVID and then with the H-1B visa, that became an issue. So he had to bow out. But I think just having him involved at first gave me much more confidence to approach other people. And I work with Bishop on several films, and I work with him on some short films that I did. And so I knew I wanted to have Bishop in the film. And so he kind of lent the air of like respectability to the film. And then finally, when Neil couldn't do it, I was like, well, I think to go back to the marketability, it was a case of like, who's around. And this goes back to what Mark Duplass talked about, is that, look for some actors that maybe haven't been doing things for a while, or they're kind of a little bit under the radar. That's where I saw Tom Matthews, and I was like, well, he could be really cool. Yeah, I talked to Tom Matthews' agent, and then that got me in touch with Tom. And then finally, I did a Zoom call with him one day, and that was really cool to talk to him. And and when he said yes, I was like, I can't believe this.
I was going to ask, like, with Neil and with reaching out to agents and stuff, how did you go about like getting that information? Because I know like a lot of times it's, I've heard you talk about this in other interviews, and it's just like, okay, how did he do that? It's like, how do I get this talent? Who do I gotta talk to even get my foot in the door, kind of thing.
So IMDb Pro is really great. So if you get a subscription to IMDb Pro, that'll list a lot of their agents to talk to. And so you want to go to their agent if you can, because that's more chain of command. I was in the military kind of thing. And so to be respectful of that process, typically agents are going to screen out people. So some knucklehead comes along, with some idea, they can at least be a gatekeeper to get into the talent and kind of thing. But you want to kind of come prepared too, so that you're not just the typical knucklehead talking to the agent, that they're like blowing you off. And so that they can actually see that there's a point there, that there's a vision for this film. And then also to have a pitch deck that I kind of prepared too, that kind of talked about what the film is, like a brief synopsis, a log line, kind of my vision for the film, director's statement kind of thing, some of the people that I had attached to it, and then sent that on to them so they could at least see kind of what I was going for with the vision. So I think the pitch deck, the script, and then the teaser trailer were the pieces that I sent on. Yeah, and then it's just a matter of kind of negotiating what the price is. So it takes a bit of back and forth sometimes, and then I learned sometimes you can say, I just can't afford that, and then they might come back to you with a better offer or something. It's interesting to think about it from the point of view of a horror fan versus a distributor. Because I think distributors, if you're not in that top 100 on the IMDb ranked names, they're like, oh, well, you obviously have no one on your film, so whatever. Even though I'm like, I got the guy who beat Jason, it's freaking Tommy Jarvis, this is amazing, kind of a thing. Like every horror fan knows what I'm talking about, But to a distributor, they're like, you don't have anybody in your film. I'm like, so it's a little frustrating.
What about the rest of your cast and crew? Because you worked with a lot of talented people.
With the crew, they basically the vast majority of them came out of my workshop that I did. So I was doing a free film workshop out of the back of Shatterglass Studios in Champaign on Neal Street for since about 2016. And so by the time we were getting into the film, I probably had about 13 to 15 people who were in that workshop who, through the workshop, had also worked on other feature films. Several of us worked on, there was a Netflix documentary, Rising Phoenix, that came through. A bunch of them had worked on my physics series. We worked on those Night Dreamer music videos. So we had kind of started to develop as a crew. And in the workshop, we go through a lot of the problem solving of film sets, how to light for night, how to, what the lenses are doing, like how to pull focus, all these kinds of things, setting up C-stands, understanding that whole world, working as a crew. And so I think that was really helpful because we did have a bit more of a common language. The issue with our film is that it is largely at night, and I worked on films that were overnights, and that's a really, really hard thing to do because it just breaks you down just physically and mentally and emotionally. To put pretty much a totally green crew into something like that is tough, Hey,
that's really smart. It's kind of like you're taking like training. You got the on-the-job training. That was one of the problems I had with my film is I was working with a lot of people who necessarily hadn't been in that kind of situation. So, they're not really sure what to do. So I'm sure, with them having that experience, they were able to be a lot more proactive. So everybody take note. That's a good note right there. Start a workshop.
That literally was the only reason we made this film, and I can get into the money thing in a second, but we would go and do night lighting setups, there was a short film that we worked on prior to this that one of the guys in the workshop wrote and directed, and I felt bad because I think I was way too stressed out to be involved with him at the time, but we did do night lighting forest exteriors for his short film, and so we had the generators out there running, we had the lighting going, and it's challenging at night because you're trying to light deep background, you're trying to light your hero set, and you're also trying to light this mid-ground thing, and you don't have we didn't have condors where we could just light the world. And so we got it was a really good test of it, not only to see what you're doing, but also to communicate in that kind of environment, because you might be communicating with someone about 50 yards away to move a light. When we did the teaser trailer, we were at the camp and we were shooting some stuff during the day, and then we pivoted into the night. And it was such an interesting experience for the teaser trailer to really get the sense of what I'd been talking to them about before. When I worked on a film called Slice, it's mainly nights. It was a horror film that was in Joliet a couple years back. That broke me, It was I don't want to do this at all. Hell no, this sucks. It's hard, I'm getting yelled at by some guy. I'm trying to light this road, and they keep yelling at me about how the light's in the wrong direction, all that kind of stuff, because you don't know yet, what you're doing 50 yards down the road. And communication can be, it gets really frustrating. And that first time when we did the teaser trailer was funny because some people just never came back to the workshop after that. They're like, nope. But or they would bring the light out to where I wanted them to position it, but they didn't bring the stinger with it. So then they had to go back for the stinger, and then they go do it again, And so I think we shot that in a day and a half. So for the teaser trailer. And so the second half a day was at night, and already there were lessons that we took from that first one. So all right, I'm bringing two stingers to light with a bag. And I always, John always likes the bounce stuff. So have that on. So I think it was really interesting for us to learn through the problem solving, or learn through the failure. It wasn't failure. It was just learning through the trials, I guess.
How did you pull your main cast together?
Kind of the core characters came out of the BFA in acting program at University of Illinois. So to go back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there was this instructor at U of I, Aaron Munoz. He played Barb's dad in season 2 of Stranger Things. And so I went to go talk to him because I was like, oh, this is cool. This guy was in Atlanta for a long time. He worked on Stranger Things. I'm just kind of curious to hear his story. And then I did a short film with him. But then I talked to him about kind of the film, what I wanted to do with it. Who would you recommend from your class, or your students? And so he had a lot of really good ideas for these people would be great. I kind of described the characters I wanted, and oh yeah, this person, that person, that kind of thing. Because the way the story was set, the story takes place at the end of summer camp. a lot of these other slasher movies, they always take place at the beginning of camp where no one knows each other. They don't have that shared sense of history. Everybody's trying to hook up or whatever. And I'm like, this is not, I don't want to make that film. I want to make a film about friends who are trying to save each other's life. And so to put it at the end of the camp, they have this whole summer together where they're like tired of each other. They're annoyed with each other. They have these shared histories. So there should be some chemistry. So to have people who are friends in real life who have been through 4 years of college together in this acting program, I knew that there was going to be some chemistry there. And then for other actors that I liked in the local scene that I already worked with, I kind of wrote characters to who those people were as people. Because again, I think it's like the biggest thing to me is like authenticity of somebody. We'd always talk, it's like, look, it might be on the page and it might be your line, but if it sounds fake, sounds phony, don't say it. Say it in your own way.
How many days did it take you to shoot this film, and how did you go about getting it scheduled?
I want to say we were at the camp for about 15 days, and I think we shot for 13 of those days. And then I think there were altogether probably about 21 days of additional filming. So there was like the prologue shoot that we did. There was a lot of inserts that we did. There was, the end of the film, because it was during COVID still, and the end of the film takes place in a hospital. And so it was impossible to find any hospital during the pandemic that would let us in. To go to the scheduling, I would go to the camp like months ahead of time to think about how to do the film, and then I went to an ASC workshop, masterclass out at the ASC in LA. And then the last day I was there, I went to go to Paramount and I walked through the lot. I started thinking like, oh, wow. And seeing how Paramount's lot was laid out, it was like all these locations are close to each other. And it's really a matter of what you show your audience is what they see in the film. So at Paramount, you could have all these locations like right next to each other across the street, but the audience doesn't know what you don't show them. And I remember the first time I went to the camp and it was like in the evening, and the lights started coming out of the different places. I started to see the camp as like a backlot at Paramount. So instead of this big, huge location, I started to see these little locations within the camp. So even though the camp is like all laid out and like here's the dining hall and here's these little cabins and here's the other places. Going back to our story clock, in the story clock, I had the paper and I made this huge poster board of the story clock. And I started to use different colored markers to show like what the locations were in the film, so that I could start to think about, okay, like I want to shoot all of these blue locations are like Lexi's cabin or something. So we're going to shoot all that out in one night, and then we're going to move to a different we'll wrap that one piece of the film out, and then we're going to move to this place and we'll shoot everything in the pool, all this other stuff, kind of a thing. And so it was really just looking at the film by location in the camp as to where to shoot. And then sometimes it's like they're just walking through the forest. So it's like, okay, we'll shoot this way with our lights. So we'll stage our lights kind of like down this line. And then we're going to flip the heads of our lamps this way. And now we're shooting this other place that's going to look slightly different or whatever. And so there's just lots of cheats that you can do. And that was the thing when I went to the master class, was seeing how much these huge DPs that shoot these Hollywood blockbuster films cheat like all the time. And some of these guys were like Caleb Deschanel, who was like shooting like The Natural and stuff. All the ways they would cheat back then was kind of amazing and actually really liberating, because then you're not worried so much about like, well, the moon's coming from this way and needs to be this thing, all these stupid things that you get locked into. No one cares, if the audience is paying attention to like the direction of moonlight is coming in, then you have bigger problems. So it was really just about that. So then I think the scheduling was really looking by location and then also by time of day. The first 2 days we shot, I think like 8 to 8, and we were shooting August. So I think our sun was coming, I think typically it was like from about 5:30 in the morning was like kind of start of blue hour into 6:30 a.m. was like golden hour. I think we're into blue hour about like 8:30 to 9 or something. So our first 2 days were 8 to 8. Then we did 2 splits of 2 to 2, which were brutal because you're shooting for the day and then you break and then you start setting up for your nighttime and then you're just in the night, kind of a thing. And then just the way schedules work is you usually go like 6 hours from call time or shoot call into your lunch or whatever, right? So if our call time was 2 and we would go till 8 and have our lunch there, it just kicked our butt those 2 days, because it's like we're literally breaking in blue hour which would have been better to just hold off a little bit longer. So we had that time to like set our lighting up while it's still kind of, you can see the lights, you know, and you start to dial it in, and then you could go to lunch and come back and you'd be in the dark. But basically we would break right when we should have like lit, and then we'd come back in pitch dark and we'd try to put up lights then, and you're trying to find stuff and everything, and everybody's losing their mind, and I lost my mind a few times. And then the rest of it was the 6 to 6 overnights, and that's where, you know, crew call time was 6 p.m. And then we would do our safety meetings every day, and in the safety meeting I'd make our lighting diagram, and I'd be like, all right, everybody take a photo of the lighting diagram, put it on your phone so you know where everything is, you know, so all you have to do is just go and execute the plan. And so there was just lots of things like that we would always try to do. We were trying to basically make an 80s studio slasher film on like 16 grand with crew who have never made a film before.
You shot this movie, your main location was at an actual camp. How did you go about actually securing the camp to shoot it for so many days?
So I looked at a lot of different camps around the area, and the one that was perfect was told me to, you know, hell no, would they have a horror film shot there? And then I looked around and I saw this other Boy Scout camp nearby. And then I was thinking about, you know, Friday the 13th, several films were shot at Boy Scout camps. And so I was like, well, there's a precedent there. So obviously they might say no, they might say yes. We were isolated enough that it could be considered like a COVID bubble for filming. And when they said yes, I was like, this is amazing. This is great. You know, we have our location now. And so once we knew that we locked the location, then I could really start to dial in the story. Because I think for me, I'll write to what locations I have, you know. But no, that was like probably about like it was a good amount. I think it was like around like $3,000 or something for the camp, for the location. But yeah, to be there at the camp, you know, for that entire time was great. You know, we all stayed at the camp. We stayed in these like kind of shacks, like these counselor shacks and stuff. And so I wasn't at a fancy hotel or anything. I was like with the crew. Because I think, again, to go back to when you're asking people to do something like this, like, you better be with them. You know, I've been on enough sets to see like these directors who are kind of sit at the monitor and they have their little latte, and all these producers are on their phone. They look so checked out. Well, the crew is busting their ass to make this happen, you know. And so I'm like, I'm not going to be that guy who's just sitting back there coasting while everybody else is working hard and sweating their butt off.
One of the most interesting things about your film, at least, you know, from my nerdy filmmaker perspective, is that you were able to like pull off a lot of really cool set pieces at the beginning of your movie and the end. I mean, you had ambulances and police cars and the hospital room, as you mentioned, and then you had this big, you know, search team at the end of your film. Walk me through a little bit, like, how were you able to pull a lot of those items off, and like, how did you go about, you know, doing all that? Again,
going back to the smoke and mirrors is kind of what you show your audience. And then also, I think, like, as a filmmaker, I think it's really important when I don't care if you're doing like an interview set up for somebody, or if you're doing a video or music video or whatever. It's like, always kind of be professional, try to have integrity when you're dealing with people, and leave a good impression. So I feel like that opened a lot of doors for us to get access to those kinds of things, you know, because people are putting a lot of trust in you to not destroy their place. One, I think anamorphic lends itself to a bigger world, a bigger universe. I think that's why a lot of indie films are shot so like on a 50 millimeter lens at like 1.4, or you don't see the production behind you. But I wanted the world of the camp to feel like a part of the film. And so the beauty of it was the camp had this great kind of timeless look to it already. And so it really was just about lighting that world, letting our actors play in that world. And that made it feel bigger, I think, in a way. You know, it's like have one person walk through the woods, like when Lexi walks towards like that you know, like that distant place where she sees the papers on fire and all this stuff. It's like, you know, you can see that whole world there when you light it. One of the executive producers in the film, I did a lot of video work for him, and he had this awesome car shop with a lot of like vintage cars. That's where we got the 68, you know, red Mustang, you know, convertible. He had the pickup truck that we turned into the sheriff's vehicle. And then I got a light bar behind me that we just kind of set up there. And then the ambulance came from kind of through the Danville Fire Department, because they were the sub medics for the film, and they had some connections to volunteer fire department that would come out. And so we got to do the ambulance scene. And then with the hospitals, that was through this organization called Ilias. It's funny because like when I first shot the ending of the film, and we couldn't get in any hospital, so I found a building that had 2 floors. On the second floor, it had just an empty room that conceivably looked like a hospital room. And on the first floor at the end of the hallway, it had like 2 doors with like some metal crap on the bottom or whatever, right? And it's like, well, that looks kind of like a hospital room, even though like I hated the wall because along one wall was like all this horrible like Pepto-Bismol magenta that made my skin crawl. When we originally shot the ending, it's like, you know, you're looking into this room and the character's outside, but the room is on the second floor, the hallway is on the first floor. And then we finally got there, I set up the whole room and everything, but then the guy at the location's like, you got 45 minutes, because he didn't want us to be there anyway. I had like 45 minutes to shoot 5 pages, so I was like just running. It's the only thing that exists from the beginning of that is Warren Copper in the hospital. So every time you see him, that's from the previous shoot. And then when we redid it, he was already out of the country. He was in Ireland teaching, acting over there. So Lexi was just talking to like a stand-in for him. And so so actually I found a location that had 2 hospital wings. And so that's where you see the end of the film is like from that location. So I think like, you know, again, it's like problem solving, but also remembering that your audience only sees what you show them. So I used that footage from the original location, but then we went to the new location to get her stuff. The problem I felt was like, one, I was running like crazy to shoot 5 pages in 45 minutes. So it was like very handheld. Like, so Warren Copper's shot is kind of handheld, hers is on sticks. But also like the final thing that she says, where she says her brother's name, she kind of did it in a sad way. But I was like, you're a survivor now. At this moment, you're a survivor. So you're saying your brother's name in a way that is like, it's a relief and an acknowledgement of that he existed in your life. And so it was so cool to be able to go back to the ending, because it's like the most important, to me, was the most important scene in the whole film. So to be able to do it better was great. Initially we shot where like Peter and Lexi maybe had like a romantic thing there. And then later on I was like, this is all wrong. Like it's not that there's a chance for them to be romantic anymore. It's a chance for them to recognize the survivor in each other. And so I was so grateful that the actors were able to come back and we could do that and we did it right. Because I felt like that's the thing that survivors see in each other, is they have that bond of the survivor's bond or whatever, the trauma bond or whatever. And so I wanted Peter to finally grow up and not be like the annoying, you know, like when I was 18, I was always like pining over some girl or whatever, but I wanted him to grow up through the film and not see her anymore as some cute girl, but now as someone that he cares about and is a friend to, and they've been through this thing together.
That's kind of a perfect segue into my next question, because you've been kind of talking about this a little bit, but like one of my favorite things about this film is that we as indie filmmakers, we just have all the odds against us when we're making this kind of thing. Like, you know, especially with a horror film, because if you can't like get the kills right, then, you know, it kind of breaks the entire illusion. And one thing that I found really interesting that you did, as far as maybe your budget constraints, you could have either done this because of your budget constraints, or you're just kind of, maybe that was just more of a stylistic choice, but I noticed that a lot of your kills were shot in wide shots. Now, did you do that purposely because of those budget constraints? And if that was the case, I'm kind of curious, what other things did you do to kind of overcome, you know, maybe areas of the film where you weren't able to do things that you wish you had?
So there was some intention behind some of those kills, and it had a lot to do with gaslighting. So I kind of feel like, because I went through like pretty terrible emotional and psychological abuse, and it was a lot of gaslighting and a lot of like smear campaigns and a lot of like manipulation and triangulation and all this kind of crazy stuff. What I wanted for a couple of shots was less the kill and more what follows after. So there's a scene where like we're finally revealed that Mike is the killer of the thing. And when he turns around and he kills the sheriff. I wanted it to be in a wide because I want the audience to not deny that Mike is doing this. So I feel like, to me, it's like to cut into the insert shot is to take away from seeing Mike do this, you know, because then after that, he goes back to like someone's watching him and like Lexi's seeing this. And so he tries to spin it immediately and gaslight her. He's like, he's the killer, Lexi, he's the killer. I feel like it was interesting to be there because I had talked to like a lot of the cast and crew about the themes of the film and the things that I had been through. And I don't think that they really got a sense of it until we did some of those scenes. When they see that, and then they see Mike say that to Lexi, they're like, oh, wow, this is different than we thought. This is like pretty disturbing in a way, you know, to really see the gaslighting part. So that's why like some of those kills were in the wide. The first kill with Dougie, where the killer is standing out there and they all go walk out to him, I was going to do only as a oneer, and I never really wanted to punch in at all. So it was going to be that wide shot you see where they first walk out there, and you see them out there. And the whole thing takes place out there at a distance. The blocking was really fun, and I kind of loved it. And so I left it alone as a oneer, but then some of my friends were like, you got to cut into the thing. And I'm like, all right, fine. I mean, we shot all that coverage anyway, but I still loved how it played as a oneer. I think there's just something eerie about seeing something from a distance, as a casual observer, to see this murder happen and then this person attacks somebody else. And that felt very disturbing and eerie to me, to be so removed from it and to see this thing happen. But then, of course, horror fans probably are not about that.
I mean, it's definitely different. I mean, it's something that I don't see a lot typically, and I think that's why I respect it a lot. It's cool to hear you talk a little bit that it was more of an intentional choice and not just because you had to. So I think that adds a lot just overall to it. One thing I've heard you say from our personal conversations and from other interviews I've heard you speak in is one of the criticisms you got is, where's the blood? I noticed in your Kickstarter that you had kind of like a wish list. Like, if we hit this goal, we could do this thing, and I'll put this on screen too. What do you wish that you were able to accomplish that you didn't get to do in this movie?
I think more time, because we were running so fast. That's just a luxury, because you can do more, you can get more coverage. You can kind of see if things are working. Because there are times when there's some shots in the film I'm just not happy with how they were lit, or just I wish I had more coverage of certain things, because I think as my kind of philosophy on shooting it was like, okay, like at the beginning of the film, it's much more composed shots. And as we're going through, and we're starting to feel the energy of everything, and it's becoming more and more unhinged, I want to have more handheld kind of a thing. But there are times where I feel like that bit me in the butt, because I didn't have a way out, where if I would have had a master shot, that would have helped me to cover some rough coverage or whatever that I just couldn't do, because I never did that shot. Just to take more time with the actors, I just think time is the best resource you can have as an indie filmmaker, because you're not going to forget the money. It's never coming, I think we did the best job we could, and I think James did a really amazing job with the sound design. So I think going forward for part 2, I think that's an area that I'm looking at, is like more makeup effects, more sound design, and more time.
I think one of the hardest things to accomplish as an indie filmmaker is just getting good quality sound. And that was another thing that I was really impressed with. I was like, man, this movie is crystal clear. If you guys had a lot of trouble, I didn't notice it personally. So I'm curious, like, how did recording, especially filming in the woods and stuff, like how was recording the sound, and how much ADR in comparison to original sound did you have to do for the film?
We used Sennheiser, I think MKE 600 and the MHK 416, and then we had like loud mics as well. We had the Sennheiser G3s that we were using on people, and then I put a mic directly on my camera, which saved a lot of the film sometimes, because sometimes like the boom wasn't very strong or whatever. I think going forward, I always have like lavs and all the talent, because sometimes that lav will save you, but then sometimes the boom will save you too. And then I'll probably do the same thing again, is put that microphone directly on the camera. Like I had the Sennheiser like right there in front of the face sometimes. So sometimes that was the best audio we got. The funny thing that they say, and now I really understand it, is like, if all you do on your film is get good audio, get good, clean dialogue, you basically won the war right there. Get it in focus, light it decent, that audio better be good. So there's lots of things that you can do. I think one thing is get location audio of every room that you are in, and then get that wild audio too sometimes, because that stuff will save you too. But yeah, it was challenging. We went through a lot of that. We had to do a lot of cleanup. There's some good apps to clean up stuff. I think Isotope is a really good one. I just started doing a lot of sound design, because I like to have sound design in my film in a rough cut even. So I would do like temp sound design already. So as I was watching it, listening to it, I already had like 25 tracks of like temp sound or whatever going on. I think by the time we got done, we had like 900 tracks of audio. I would say the vast majority of the dialogue in the film is production audio. There was a handful of places that we did definitely do ADR, like when Wyatt or Peter is on the bridge when he meets the killer for the first time. There were no roads to get to the bridge. The bridge is out in the middle of nowhere, so we had to bring a generator out there. So basically the generator was like right underneath the bridge, Peter's like right above it. So every time he would talk, it would be like a lawnmower fell out of his mouth. I remember the day when we finally replaced his dialogue with the ADR. I was like, oh my God, it's finally there, you know. It was like a small miracle. You know, I built an ADR booth in my basement, you know, so I took a bunch of C-stands, Fernie blankets, and I created this kind of ADR booth in my basement. And then we had like 3 different mics that we'd use. We'd use the same one we used from a set. We had like a lav on talent, and then we also had like a kind of a more of a, you know, just a kind of a room mic or whatever that we'd use too. So we did a lot. We ADR'd every single line with all the actors, but really that was just as a backup.
So I've heard you talk about this in this interview. I've heard you talk about it in other interviews. You quoted earlier about Jay and Mark Duplass's infamous quote, "The cavalry isn't coming." I had a lot of hard days on set on my film where, you know, I may have, like you said, you know, 13 to 15 people helping out. And then other days I'll have like me. Walk me through a good day on set that you had, and then walk me on like maybe a not so good day on set where you may have been by yourself or you just didn't have a sufficient amount of crew.
To kind of preface this, we had these equity investors. They were going to throw in $50,000, and that was going to cover all of the rates for the film for the crew and the cast. And 4 days before we started, they sent me all of the legal paperwork, and I read it, and I realized that they were basically stealing the IP. They're stealing all the copyright and everything. I turned down their $50,000, and we did an emergency meeting that night with the cast and crew, and I was like, can we afford to make this film? You know, can you guys give me 2 weeks of your time? We've got this $16,000 Kickstarter coming. We've got $20,000 that's coming in. The shoot is taken care of. We've got catering. We've got a place to stay. Some of you guys can get paid who really need it. And for those of you who can be a little bit more flexible, you know, I'm going to be paying you guys off in installments. You know, basically after the film wrapped, I would take on, you know, day gigs, and I'd pay the cast and crew back from like, you know, like my monthly paychecks from my work or whatever, you know, and stuff like that, because it's like, you know, I didn't want to get to the end and be like, oh, I owe everybody money, and now it's like there is no money coming because the distributor screwed us or whatever, you know. The emergency meeting, it was tough. I think that all the crew came and they were like, cool, like gung-ho, let's freaking do it, you know. And I think that makes sense because we'd been together for a long time through the workshops and stuff. And I think the cast I don't know that the cast fully grasped the reality of the situation until we were in it. And so I think it was kind of a confusion of like, oh shoot, what do you mean there's not money coming kind of a thing? And so that was really frustrating because I feel like it was just like a lack of the reality of what you're signing up for sometimes. And so I think that was tough, and that created some tension. I think with any film, there's always stress on it. And the biggest lesson I kind of learned in this film was like, you really have to understand how your stress is impacting everybody else, because then you're making other people stressed out, and then they might not react in a very good way. The shoot schedule was getting messed up too, and I was getting frustrated because I think the scheduling became a mess, and it wasn't what I had scheduled the film to be. And so then there was a lot of friction over that. And I'm like, where's this actor? How come this person's here right now? Like, they're off screen. That's a $275 mistake right there or whatever, you know, because now I got to pay this person for being there. And so there was just a lot of things. And then there was some toxic elements behind the scenes. And the thing I kind of learned about this too, and I try to tell people about this after the fact, is like, do not judge your film based on your emotional experience making the film. So I don't care if you're a grip or a PA or the producer or the director, don't judge the quality of the film based on your feeling, you know, because it can be a tough slog, but that could be a great film. It could be a party and your film's going to suck. So don't think about it from that point of view. And I think that some people were thinking about it from that point of view. And so it's just tough. And as a producer and a director and a DP, and I had all of this stress on me. Sometimes I think this is what I would say to like a lot of people out there who are doing your films, because every film is stressful. I don't care if it's a short film or what. It's just like, take a step back. I don't think I was always listening to people. So I think it's just, there's no reason to ruin a friendship over a film. Just keep perspective, I think. It's such a pressure cooker that you will be insane. And I think the good day is just, there are those moments where everything is cooking, everything is like clicking, and it's a wonderful thing, you know. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think that's why we keep coming back. It's because we love film, because we have those moments where everything clicked and the moon was in the right place and this is beautiful. And I'm going to do this again and get my ass kicked.
While I was doing some research just on the film and you in general, you'd mentioned in other interviews, and actually in this interview too, how you ran into a lot of issues like the 5.1 surround sound issue that you had, or just learning about, you know, DCPs and the color space of DCPs, for an example. What were some of the biggest things that kind of just snuck up on you in the making of, or I mean, the making, or even, you know, in the release of it?
There's a big one, Foley. Yeah, for sure. Because I think the thing that we don't realize is that eventually, like if you get distribution, your film is going to go to quality control. And the problem that a lot of indie films have is they aren't even thinking about Foley. They're thinking like, this sounds good, but a lot of your sound is in your dialogue track. So all the stuff that the boom op was picking up when you're making the film out in the field, the footsteps, the hands, all that kind of stuff, you have to replace all of that. So what we could do is you basically like take your audio file and you'll razor up all the dialogue, but then you'll take all of your production sound, you pop it down onto another audio track or whatever. And then, from that, you can kind of start to, because basically like when they're doing M&E, like they have to replace the, mute your dialogue track and you'll find out how bare your film actually is. And so all that sound that you're not hearing, you have to go do. And so I was like, my friend Chad like cut a piece of sod out of the back of his yard and I was doing all the footsteps and stuff, and it was crazy. And I got to the point where I got so kind of pissed about doing the footsteps thing. I feel like I kind of yelled at the QC people. It's like, I don't need to hear every last freaking footstep in the forest, because they want to hear every last freaking thing. And I was like, I don't need to hear the dude across the way. My God, dude, like shut up, But it's just, I think the thing I've learned is like, if the shot calls attention to it, you better hear it. And I think that is the weak spot of a lot of indie films is you'll see they just don't have the audio, the sound design that should be there. And so that I think is the big difference between a bigger budget film that has that ability to have all of that sound design in there versus like an indie film. Like if you don't, like we had 900 tracks of audio in our film, by the end of it. Most feature films have like 2,000, it's insane. So if you're looking at your audio and you don't have if you have like 20 tracks of audio, you probably need a few more.
Did you do all that stuff, you guys, like with the M&E track? And for those who don't know, an M&E track is a music and effects track. So basically what he's saying is he's separating out the sound effects, the dialogue, the music, etc. Did you and your editor do all that yourself?
I did that, and then then James Streichler, who did the mix of the film, like he would do a lot of that too. So we had he had like a massive Pro Tools session going, like just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tracks. I mean, I even want to get into how many crickets we used in the film. It was like just layers and layers of crickets and wind noise and room tone. And room tone's a great one too, to have like just white noise sometimes. And then it's fun too to go to like with scary films, sometimes like our scene without a lot of sound can take on more urgency and more of a scare versus like tons of layers and music and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a lot of, I think, sound is such a huge thing, especially for horror films. So I feel like, for filmmakers out there, it's like I would just really think about your film from the sound point of view. Because I went with James, and then there's another guy, Justin Walden, and we would listen to horror films at my house. I have like a 5.1 surround system. And so we would go through and listen to different films. We listened to films from that era. Like we listened to Nightmare on Elm Street, which surprisingly had a really bad sound mix on it. Like it was surprising, but then you realize like that guy had 2 weeks to mix that whole film. And then we went to Friday the 13th Part 6, and it had a much more a studio film of the 80s, what you would expect with like the canned audio sounds. And then we went to Gone Girl, which had just amazing sound design. Even like Halloween Ends has an incredible sound design in terms of the weight of objects, and the placement and everything, and the absence of sound sometimes. And I love the crispness of the dialogue. And so it's really interesting to listen to a movie, and see it. And then you're just seeing just so much texture around you and so much ambience to it. It's really cool.
You've had a lot of reviews of this movie, both critics and audience, some good, some not so good. I'm curious how you've kind of kept like mindfulness throughout this entire process of your release, and just how you've kept your head above water, just not sinking into those reviews.
I think it's tough because I think that it's one of those things where you spend 5 years of your life making this thing, and every last behind the scenes miracle to make this thing happen. And then some knucklehead's going to be like, no boobs, lame, or something like that, when it was never your intention anyway. I told my cast and crew like a week before, I was like, I think what's going to happen with our film is that the wrong audience is going to come first, because they're going to be coming from the place that like, this is a Friday the 13th film. They're going to be like, oh, we love gore because we saw Terrifier 2. And they're not really going to get the point of our film at first. So I think that, because because I feel like the people that I've talked to who really like the film love it from the point of view of the survivor aspect, which is what I was always going for anyway. And I think that they like it for what it is and not for what they think it should be. Like, I think the problem with slasher films, and this is the thing I started to kind of talk about really, was like I feel like the tropes are kind of a hurdle for people to get over. So like, I've had so many people review the film from the point of view of like a checklist. A slasher film is this, a slasher film is that, a slasher film should have a giant killer, a slasher film should do these things, slasher film should have someone at the end of the movie telling you about like the explanation for why they're doing the thing. The funny thing was I started to see the bad reviews as not bad reviews. They were commenting on things that we were directly, intentionally not doing. And so I was like, it's actually not a bad review. It's just that they're having an issue with a thing that we did not want to do. And much of that is based on my own experience with having PTSD, with my own experience surviving like a sociopath and bringing those themes to the film, you know? So I think it's just interesting to think about it from the point of view of what I've been through and what I put into the film. And I think I have empathy for the audience, because it's like I think the fact that they're having a hard time understanding some of that stuff is good, because it's such a hard thing to understand. I mean, I went to years of therapy, and the best I could come away with was that I needed to start thinking of it like I lived through a hurricane. When I stopped thinking of it from like, well, why did that mean? Why did this person do that? Why did they do that? I could actually start some healing. But when I kept thinking like, what does it mean? Why did they do that? What did I do? I was still stuck in that world of PTSD. So I think it's the people who have got what we're really trying to do really get it. And the people who are just looking for another slasher film are just going to be like, F this guy and this guy sucks and all this stuff, you know. You can't make everybody happy.
I don't want to get into the release too much, which I know is kind of crazy to say considering that you just released the movie, but I feel like the release really deserves its own conversation, and I think we need to like maybe circle back to this later down the line when the movie's been out for a little bit. Talk to me a little bit just about your experience with, you got into a lot of film festivals. You did some theatrical releases. I mean, you even got to screen at Kevin Smith's theater, which I think is super cool. How did that kind of how was your experience with just the release and distribution and all that kind of been just in the beginning so far? Yeah,
I think the festivals have been great, because I feel like that was the great place to connect with other filmmakers and test out the audience. The film kept taking shape throughout the whole festival run. Yeah, we did like a hometown screening. We did like 4 screenings over 4 days, and we made like $3,000 from that. So that was pretty great. We played opposite Halloween Ends at a drive-in October 13th of last year, and we actually outsold Halloween Ends on its opening night. It was its opening night. I was scared to death we were gonna get blown out. So I would do all these like funny videos and stuff. So it's been really interesting. I think the distribution side of it is the most eye-opening experience, because like I went to AFM and I saw that world, and that's worth its own podcast basically. The distributors are trying to make money for sure, so they're looking for films that are going to make money. But I think that there's lots of like things that you don't realize. So some distributors are looking for content to like build their library or whatever. I think if your budget is under $100,000, you should just not even bother getting a distributor, because you probably have a better chance of making your money back. If you have a film that is under $100,000, like ours was, that had a lot of viral potential to it, like our poster was going viral a bunch of times, our trailer was going viral a bunch of times, I think self-release it or put it on Film Hub or something like that, because the avenues are kind of similar, but I think your ability to kind of retain more profit is better, because I think the problem is like just streaming in general. And I think the problem that's happened with film is what happened with music, because everybody started consuming on Spotify. And so like my friend who's in this Mashing Pumpkins, like they don't really make any of their money off of music sales. They make it off of touring or merch or something like that. So and to think that's crazy, because they used to be like this multi-platinum band, and so I think that's the same with streaming. So I think physical media. So I would say like if you can like retain your rights to physical as a filmmaker, producer, try to only go for like digital streaming if you can. I retain theatrical. So that's why sometimes I'll do like screenings and stuff like that. And then I say don't sign anything that has anything to do with sub-licensing your film. If you see the word sub-license, run screaming away. Don't sign that stuff. Not at all. And then finally to get it out to the actual streaming platforms is fascinating too. It's tough. I think the hardest, there are like 3 miracles in film. I think the first miracle is to finish your film. The second miracle, it's like in Top Gun Maverick when he's talking about the miracles. The second miracle after that is like to get distribution. But the absolute hardest miracle of all is to get people to watch your film.
What are the things that you attribute to your personality or, anything that have contributed to your success thus far?
The big thing for me was just having a supporting, caring, loving partner who could understand what I was going through all these years. Because if I was with that other person, I would never be here. None of the stuff I'm doing now would even have a prayer of happening because of just how crazy everything was. That it was just put out insane fire after insane fire. So I think the fact that I have a partner like I do now is amazing. I think the thing for me is like I kind of, because of all the insanity of all that abuse I went through, I always kind of thought after the fact, it's like, well, all right, I'm never with that person ever again. I'm never going to let anybody like that ever have that amount of control over my life ever again. And the person's not in my life anymore. So I have nothing to be afraid of anymore. And so I think that's the thing is I don't really have as much of a fear anymore about making an ass out of myself or like doing something stupid. So I think the idea of making films and putting it out there for everybody to like, throw mud at you and stuff, doesn't really make me afraid anymore. So I think like a lot of filmmakers, I think have fear of like, oh, what if they don't like the film? Well, odds are they're probably not going to like your film. So just do it anyway. Make the film you want to make the film that you love, make the film that's in your head and in your heart and stuff. And so I think that's the most important thing. And don't worry about if they're going to like it, because half of them are going to like it, half of them are going to hate it. The ones that hate it are going to freaking tell you. So get used to having thick skin. And I think that's where I was joking with a friend of mine, like, oh, what is someone going to do? Tell me if they don't like my movie? Oh, no. And so I think that's the thing I would give to other filmmakers. Don't let that fear of failure, don't let that fear of negative criticism control you and keep you from making a film and taking a chance. Go make a summer camp slasher. Who gives a shit? There's 1,000 other films out there that are summer camp slashers. Just do one again. They're going to tell you you're ripping off Friday the 13th anyway, which is a rip off of Halloween. So just make the film that you love. I wanted to see this film. I wanted to see a fun roller coaster slasher film. That's why I wanted to make this film. So I think go into your audience, make the film that you want to see.
John, thank you so much. I mean, this is incredible. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to start the show in the first place. Is I get frustrated with not being able to have questions that I want answered. That was definitely a frustration I had when I was making my movie. A lot of interviews with filmmakers or just information online is a lot of surface level stuff. So I'm glad I got the chance to kind of dig a little bit further than the usual questions. Where can people find Final Summer? Where can people watch it right now?
I got the link tree somewhere, but it's Amazon, Redbox, Google Play. It's in the UK. It's all over the place. So the best way to go is like find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Final Summer Movie. And right in the bio, there should be a link to the link tree there. So yeah, and I'm not Josh. I don't know who Josh is, but I'm going to blame him for everything. They have me listed as Josh Isberg for some reason. I'm like, thanks.
John, I really appreciate your time. This is awesome. We're definitely going to have to catch up again and talk about how your distribution has gone. So thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.